welcome to Something to Talk About, which is the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center's regular program, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and often other times as well. To find out what's coming out next, go to biseniorcenter.org/calendar, and you can find a full listing of upcoming programs. We're sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, and we're grateful for their support of this program. They offer innovative and compassionate care on Rolling Bay. They also have respite care and day stays. To find out more or to schedule a tour, call 360-689-4314. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically our neighbors from the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We are grateful for their hospitality and we honor them. We today are going to talk with the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce and a member of our City Council about a discussion point, item that was raised across chambers of commerce in Kitsap County that found some interest in a ferry option, a fast ferry option between Bainbridge Island and Bremerton. And one of the people who indicated an interest in joining this conversation today said, I'd love to, but I am taking a ferry from Bainbridge to Seattle and then from Seattle to Bremerton to make an appointment today, and I can't be on the call, so I hope I can watch it later. So Stefan and Leslie are here, Stefan Goldby and Leslie Schneider. Stefan, why don't you start us off, since I know that you talked about this in a newsletter from the Chamber several months ago.
I would actually defer to Leslie first, because she was the one that actually brought the idea to us, and then we noodled it together. So I think ladies first.
How kind. So I'm trying to go back in my brain to, when this idea sort of popped to the forefront. And I think basically, I'm on the board for Kitsap Transit. We were having discussions about the survey results. And somehow this idea came up in a brainstorming session that I was in, and I just loved the idea that there might be an intra-county connection, a ferry connection, a foot ferry connection between Bainbridge and Bremerton. So if you look on the map, there are some points that are very, very close. That's kind of misleading when you think about what the feasibility might be for such a ferry. So I think what happened next is I brought it up at a economic development meeting with the chamber. And again, there was some excitement about exploring the idea. And then I coordinated a meeting with Stefan and John Clausen, just the three of us. And, we heard some really good things, didn't we, Stefan? Probably too good. So after that meeting, it felt like maybe there was a possibility for a small pilot program very, very soon, taking a ferry from Bremerton around into Eagle Harbor and potentially docking at the city dock, because docking at the at the WashDOT terminal is probably ultimately the best idea, but it wouldn't happen for quite a while. Whereas the city dock probably could accommodate, the boat size that we might use. So that was a very exciting idea. And we were imagining, very short travel times and yeah. So then John Clausen, the CEO of Kitsap Transit, did a little bit more investigating, and I think he asked his staff to do sort of a back of the napkin calculation about how long it would take a ferry to get from Bremerton into our Eagle Harbor, which means it's a much longer route than going, let's say, to Crystal Springs or Linwood Center or whatever. And we would have to do that with a slow ferry because fast ferries just aren't available. You can't just go out and grab one, in the marketplace. So, trying to shortcut something that would be 5 years out or longer, we were really hoping that there might be a chance for a pilot. What we got back was Not as encouraging. It looked like it might take, 50 minutes or something like that to get clear around. Was that, Stefan, am I remembering that correctly, or was it closer to
I think it was a little
hour?
shorter than that, but
Shorter?
Finish
Okay.
your point and then I'll jump in.
Sure. So at that time, we sort of decided that we needed more information. And so where we've gone from there is a number of meetings later. We've checked in with the Washington State Senate head of transportation, Senator, Stefan, help me out here, Marco Lius, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And so we had a really good conversation with him, and he seemed very positive about the state being able to allocate some funding for a feasibility plan. So funding for a foot ferry feasibility plan, say that 5 times. So, and then he was also asking if I would check around with the rest of our legislative team and make sure that they weren't taken by surprise by it. So I've done that. And in the process of checking in with Christine Rolfus, she said, sure, I support this. And, or maybe it was a but, I'm not sure. She was really concerned about Bremerton's lack of a 2-boat ferry to Seattle. And so she wanted to be sure that we were aware that that was kind of a dire need. And so I talked with Mayor Wheeler, just one-on-one, and he was, I guess he's grateful to hear that there are other people that might care. And so that grew, and we had other conversations, and now there is an official letter from Kitsap Transit, the board, and from the jurisdictions that is basically telling the legislature that we support Kitsap Transit putting additional foot ferry service into place for the Bremerton to Seattle route. I know this is a lot of detail, but it's kind of, and that would only go for as long as WashDOT was, until WashDOT's able to put a second boat into that route. So probably next spring or early summer is when WashDOT is saying that they could get a second boat. So this could really help Bremerton out a lot.
So I'm just curious. I'm just curious because we're kind of talking about the logistics. When you were talking about this, what was the identified need? What kind of benefit outside of just the idea?
That's probably a good place for Stefan to jump in, right?
Yeah, I'll say mine's less operational detail and more big picture, I think. I mean, for us, when Leslie brought this up, it was in the context of, we obviously have something of a crisis of housing affordability and certainly housing diversity on the island. You're seeing that in very stark terms in the fact that your favorite restaurant on the island probably isn't open 7 days a week and may not, frankly, be open 5 days a week. And that's not just a hospitality problem. There's all, other than the large swathe of professional consultants on the island, anybody who's actually hiring a bulk of people is really having difficulties hiring, and more than that, retaining staff, because it's brutal to try and find a place to live on Bainbridge. There's just a shortage of supply in general before we even get into capital A affordable housing. And then B, again, something that's pretty obvious to everybody that lives here, traffic across the bridge is getting steadily worse and worse and worse. And if you're not lucky enough to be able to define what time you start work, you end up getting almost thrown to the wolves and in a tailback that's going past the casino and, a long ways down the highway.
And many of our folks know that they have a hard time finding caregivers or housekeeping support because they're coming.
Right. So really this was in, and then the third thing is, with my visitor information hat on, we have last mile transportation issues of getting visitors to the island, even to Blodell. That same thing is a problem for the workers at Blodell and whatever else. So really, this idea was kind of part of a 3-pronged approach strategically for the chamber, right? One is, we're definitely in favor of affordable housing. The difficulty there is the speed at which it can be created with all the goodwill in the world. I mean, Bethany's, you know, over a year into the just talking about it at various stages. And I'm not knocking anything, but it's just like, you know, there's no magic wand of housing. It just takes a while. You know, the second thing is the transportation we have being improved. That's ongoing. The Chamber's working really closely with Kitsap Transit and with other providers to see what we can do, and the city and their sustainable transportation plan's a piece of that. But the original interest in the ferry was, well, we already have a ferry dock, and so does Bremerton, and that's the best part of an hour's drive. And as we got into the survey numbers, that was a surprising amount of the traffic coming over the bridge was coming from that distance. And right now it's drive or take a pretty long bus journey that involves changing buses. And a lot of those things were the reasons why a lot of our local business owners couldn't retain staff, because they'd get someone and they'd be all pumped up. And 3 to 6 months of that would be like, you know what, I found a job that I don't like as much, but the drive's not so bad. Sorry.
Yeah, there are lots of places to stop in between here and Bremerton.
Indeed, there are, and not many of them are restricted by a bridge / none of them. So really, this was initially okay, given that the infrastructure's in place and the ferry dock already boasts the best multimodal transportation hub the island has, the buses are there, the parking's there. You know, a lot of the jobs are within walking distance in Winslow, and we're already trying to connect the commercial centers. So maybe this fits, and maybe it's just a, you know, let's get a boat and put on a show. That was hopelessly naive. But you know, the basic parts of this are, and Leslie alluded to the fact that the real logistical problem is rich passage. And it's not really a problem as much as we don't hate the wildlife, right? You just can't plow boats through there. The wakes are bad, essentially, for an environmental and a lot of other reasons. But with the new faster ferries that are coming online, the hydrofoils that don't have the ecological impact, it did seem reasonable that you could get to Bremerton in about the same amount of time you can get to Seattle from a ferry point of view, and that would represent about half the time it takes you to drive from Bremerton around to Winslow. You know, like Leslie said, I like to say, you know, any 5-year-old with a crayon can work out why this might be a good idea, instead, you know, that or that. So
and it's also not a new idea, right? I mean, there was a time when there was a ferry that came from Bremerton to Crystal Springs.
Right. And Crystal Springs is obviously an option that gets brought up here. There's not that transportation hub to support it on this side. And people are often like, well, it's 15 minutes less on the boat. And I'm like, right. And then it's a 12-minute drive into Winslow, and you didn't really gain anything. And now we've taken a residential neighborhood and made it a transport access. We already kind of have a ferry dock. Why don't we start there?
Right. And it isn't the same Crystal Springs as it was back when the boat was running there before the bridge.
Exactly. So while we're open-minded about things, it makes the most sense. It costs the least money. And logistically, it's the simplest to use what there is. Kitsap Transit's already done hard work with their new boats to be able to use state ferry docks. That's part of their fast ferry going into Coleman Dock, etc. work. As Leslie said, the problem is they have the only boats like that. So now you're getting into when do the next boats come online. But to try and wrap this up more quickly, the other thing here, though, is this isn't a Bremerton to Bainbridge ferry only. This isn't to bring the workers in, though that's obviously a piece of this. There are a number of people working the other way, like the Navy shipyards do run buses from the island into Bremerton in the other direction. And you know, I think there's a leisure piece of this as well. There's a lot of redevelopment being done in Bremerton. And you know, I certainly have, I think a dream might be too much, but at least an idea that it might be nice to stand at the ferry dock in Winslow and be like, Seattle, Bremerton, where do we fancy having dinner, going to see a show at the Admiral, the Roxy? Like, just that piece is nice. The cultural connection right? It gives Bainbridge a whole other connection to the south end of the county that we're in.
That's what really excites me.
Yeah, it stops being all that way away and it starts being close. The more we start talking about this with entities like the Historical Museum and the Museum of Art, these are all entities that have a mission to connect with the county, but geographically, you know, it's in a little corner that you've got to go up and around to the furthest part away. That this makes it a lot better. So I mean, I would say, look, logistically, you can see why it might be a good idea. In terms of reducing the stress on the bridge, you can see why it might be a good idea. Culturally, it might be a good idea, and just economically, right? There's a big place on the other end of that that has workers, we have jobs, and vice versa, and it would be healthy to have that into place. So that was really how it came to be, and then checking it out with Kitsap Transit and having them say, well, actually, we're already investigating this. And actually, the second phase of the Fast Ferry program was always intended to be intra-county, to connect Kitsap better to itself. And I think that, you know, that model of the Mosquito fleet was a part of that, especially if it can be a part of this electrification and the technological changes that can happen for the ferries to make them less environmentally impactful.
Great. So this sounds, and like Leslie was saying, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of sort of visioning what the logistical wheels, which logistical wheels need to turn to make this start to happen. Have there been any, outside of the timing, have there been any serious roadblocks to the idea long term? Either one of you.
Well, I think that's the next step is a feasibility study. And so that means that, you know, we have to ask the legislature for the money, and then we have to hire the consultants and do the study. So we're pushing it out a ways, but the study should answer those kinds of questions. So it'll help to establish not just our sort of ad hoc, well, we know we need workforce on the island, so let's try something. But, you know, this would be more validating about, you know, who's actually, what are the counts of riders that are coming around on the bus, spending 2 hours, you know, from this South County all the way over here. And then, you know, based on anticipated numbers, what kind of service could we support? Are we talking only traffic commute hours? Are we talking about being able to come home from, you know, a night at the Admiral Theater? So I think there are many, many hurdles, but what's exciting is that we're starting to look at this as a county-wide transportation system. And the feasibility study is, the way that John Clausen's going to pitch it is not just the Bainbridge to Bremerton, Bainbridge, but also looking at other potential routes. So there could be maybe a Bremerton Silverdale. That is an idea that so this could open up a whole new era that is kind of going back towards the mosquito fleet, and, you know, less dependent on a bridge that gets too much traffic and is too old and is going to fall down in the next earthquake. So
but actually that disaster resilience piece as well always comes up, right? Here's another boat, another connection to the outside world when the bridge potentially might not be there for a little while.
Yeah, I know that when we were doing the test, sort of the scramble as part of the statewide preparedness drill, because we have a lot of emergency workers who do not live on the island, part of that drill was to use our own ad hoc flotilla to go pick up our emergency coordinator from her home and pick up some of those emergency workers and bring them to the island to help us rescue ourselves. I want to make sure that if there's anybody else on this call that has a question, they have an opportunity to ask it. Rita, it looks like you might.
I was just wondering what size these fast ferries would be, because the fast ferry now that goes from Bremerton to Seattle is pretty good sized.
I think that's the basic idea, is to be part of that fleet. Although I said they do have these newer ones coming that are more hydrofoil based, but I think they still will be that sort
I'm thinking about coming into the city dock. You've got rowing out there all the time. You've got moorage out there. You've got people in kayaks out there. I mean,
well, and let's be clear, the city dock would just potentially be for short-term trial. You know, the long-term future would be for it to be next to the state ferries.
Gotcha.
And that also means we might experiment with different size boats to try to improve the concept sooner than later. I mean, so what I heard John Clausen say is that, well, you know, there's a certain type of boat that we could lease relatively quickly, but it would not be a fast ferry. It would be a foot ferry, but not fast. And so, you know, we don't know exactly how long it would take to do that trip, but is there still a market? You know, would people still take that ferry even if it took them 45 minutes or 50 minutes to get from Bremerton to Bainbridge, when they don't have to drive, they don't have to deal with traffic? So I think I'm hoping that we will experiment, that we will have a lot of options out in front of us, and that we could try something sooner than later, knowing that on down the road, the ideal solution would be probably one of these custom boats that is like what goes between well, I mean, the one that, you know, would take passengers from Bremerton to Seattle right now.
Well, I think you can also look at this. There is a pilot program like this running right now from Des Moines into Coleman Dock. So that hopefully that could be a predictor of the future for us, of that's sort of the next step for us, is to get to, well, the feasibility study and then a which is exactly what's going on there right now.
Oh, go ahead, Rita. Sorry.
And then the one other thing is, of course, always it's the fares, you know.
So we have been told, and it's obviously still all up in the air, that this would be competitive with the existing bus service. So that's pretty low fare. Like, frankly, right now, you can't afford to drive there for the cost of what the ticket would be with the price.
So, yeah, and as a senior, it's you know, much more inexpensive for me. But I'm just thinking, if you got workers, you want to come, you know, and that always gets to be a.
Well, and on the cultural side, remember, as of tomorrow, things start to become free if you're 18 or younger, starting tomorrow.
I thought that was September. Didn't we already?
It's October 1st.
Oh, I thought it was September 1st.
So I thought they should put seniors in that same list, the young ones and the old ones, but that's
multi-generational appeal. Exactly.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
But it is, I mean, also look at the fact that Virginia Mason's expanding their healthcare in Bremerton, for example. So having easy access to that without a car for, you know, lesser abled people, that might actually be a better solution than taking the boat to Seattle and having to get up the hill. Or you know, there's so many things that can be opened up. I don't want to get too carried away, but
yeah.
You know,
and those were just the things that popped into my head, and I know that they're down in the nitty-gritty weeds, but that's kind of where I think sometimes. So just something to think.
So if somebody is interested in pursuing this or supporting it or writing against it, I suppose, is Kitsap Transit the right place to connect? It sounds like maybe the ball's in their court to try to work on the feasibility study.
Yeah, and their survey results, I think which you had on the page for this beforehand, came back that this is, you know, this is actively a project there. Although, as Leslie mentioned, the headline project at Kitsap Transit is trying to restore Bremerton's ferry service to Seattle. And maybe this is a good point to address that as well, because in our surveys, you know, though there is a majority that like this idea the best, as long as, especially if it's tied into improved bus service on Bainbridge and it's, you know, it's part of a bigger picture. But there are certainly some people that are like, no, why don't we just get a fast ferry to Seattle? That would be a better use of an extra boat. And it's an idea, but I would point out we have 22 boats a day already to Seattle, and that the ridership is down, and that a pandemic shift has occurred here where less people are going in that direction. So, you know, I'm more in favor of adding a new route, or at least testing adding a new route, than just adding more vehicles to the existing route. And I'm really very excited about this interconnectedness within our county and being a more of a participant in the county economy as opposed to, well, you know, an island.
Yeah, we had Dana Binnendijk from Bainbridge Community Foundation come a little while ago, and if you go to youtube.com/BI Senior Center, you can see that conversation. And she was talking about their findings, and part of it was the number of people who are coming to the island to work. And so there's a lot of pressure on that whole transit corridor that you were talking about that would not be relieved by more traffic between here and Seattle. It's really between here and the rest of the county. So this is a very exciting possibility, just looking at that. And although people have talked about bridges at the south end, I think we're learning that not only is that technically a challenge, it also isn't very environmentally. We don't need to rely on more cars driving single people around.
Well, and look, I've lived in a bunch of places around the world. I've yet to find a more delightful form of public transportation than the ferry system in Washington, right? If you're going to choose your commute via public transport, you know, a boat ride through beautiful water where there might be orcas or other things, I think should be up there somewhere.
It's
True
part
enough.
of what we love about our area, that's for sure. I mean, it immediately, you know, just blew my mind to think, wow, we could change things. We could have intra-county ferry service. How cool would that be?
Yeah, and I do think that there's a psychology north and south county, which is probably not the primary goal of something like this, but as you said, could be an absolutely important ancillary goal to bring us together. One of our members, Reed Hansen, who gives a history tour every year, when he was growing up, there was no bridge, and he didn't have any idea that Paulsbo existed. There was no reason to go that far away. And there are lots of people who find, you know, the idea of trying to get services in Port Orchard or Bremerton very daunting, even though that's where a lot of the center of gravity of our county is. So it would, through a fairly simple way, draw a tighter string around our community, that's for sure.
Well, and do bear in mind, there already is the foot ferry between Bremerton and Port Orchard, right? That's been running for a while, very, very successfully. That would then deposit you 2 blocks away from the county court and, you know, all the offices there, the county auditor, et cetera, et cetera. And really the hope here is on both ends, this becomes more of an incentive to have rental bikes, to have, you know, those sort of last mile solutions, because here's the demand. You know, much like we benefit literally from hundreds of people coming off a boat looking to do stuff on Bainbridge in Winslow, you know, to have that be for people coming in the other direction and also to build the need for those services around the county, everything just becomes more economical with scale, right?
The other thing I'd love to emphasize too is that Kitsap Transit is investing quite a bit and has federal grants and whatnot for designing electric ferries. And so I'm hoping that there would be a carbon savings even if you had to take a diesel boat. But you know, if it was half or a quarter of the distance and you've got a lot more people on the bus, so to speak, over the water. But once it's electric, it just is going to help us with our sort of carbon neutral transportation goals big time. And that's something that is very motivating for me with our sustainable transportation plan and all.
I want to thank you very much for taking the time. If there's anything else that we didn't get to that you wanted to make sure we got in here.
This is very early, right? This came out of people telling us there might be a need. This is us just really trying to run that flag up the flagpole and see if there is a there, right? And it, like I said, the crayon part of it makes sense, but does the big boy math. That's what we're in the middle of now.